He thought he was kicking out a nobody. But by this time tomorrow, that same woman would bring his entire showroom to a standstill. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments below. And if you believe respect should never depend on appearance, hit like and subscribe. Now, back to Emily Carter. The glass doors of Westbridge Luxury Motors slid open with a soft, polished whisper, revealing a showroom bathed in golden afternoon light, where every surface gleamed like it had something to prove. Rows of pristine vehicles lined the marble floor, each one worth more than most homes. Reflections dancing across chrome and glass, while quiet instrumental music floated through the air like a promise of exclusivity. And into that carefully curated world walked Emily Carter, her steps calm, her expression unreadable, dressed in a simple white blouse, light denim jeans, and worn sneakers that had clearly seen better days. She didn't look like she belonged there. And that was exactly what everyone noticed first. A young salesman paused mid-sentence as he caught sight of her, his eyes flicking down to her shoes, then back up with a subtle smirk he didn't bother to hide. Across the room, Blake Thompson adjusted his tailored navy suit, the sales manager's polished demeanor masking a sharp instinct for identifying who mattered and who didn't. And to him, Emily was categorized within seconds. Not a buyer, not a priority, not worth the time. His lips curled slightly as he began walking toward her with slow, deliberate confidence, the kind that filled the space before his voice even did. "Ma'am," he said, his tone smooth but edged with quiet condescension. "These vehicles start at around $300,000. He gestured casually toward the lineup, as if explaining something obvious to a child. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable at our pre-owned location a few blocks down." A couple browsing near a silver coupe exchanged glances, one of them letting out a faint chuckle. Emily's eyes moved across the showroom, not hurried, not impressed, just observant, as if she were measuring something far beyond the price tags. She didn't react to the comment, didn't defend herself, didn't shrink either. And that silence, that steady composure, felt strangely out of place in a room built on status and noise. Blake misread it instantly, interpreting it as uncertainty, as ignorance, as proof that he was right. "If you're just here to look, we do ask that you avoid touching the vehicles," he added, his voice a touch firmer now. A subtle escalation that carried just enough edge to be noticed. The room shifted slightly, attention beginning to gather. Emily finally turned her gaze to him, her eyes calm, almost curious, as if she were seeing him more clearly than he was seeing her. And for a brief second, something about that look made Blake hesitate. But only for a second, because arrogance fills silence faster than doubt ever can. And in that moment, he chose to lean into it, unaware that every word, every assumption, every quiet dismissal was setting the stage for something he would never be able to take back. The kind of moment that doesn't just embarrass you, but rewrites how people remember you. And as Emily stood there, still composed, still silent, the showroom around them gleaming with artificial perfection, no one realized they were witnessing the beginning of a story that would end very differently than it started. And when it did, the room would not sound the same again. Morning arrived with a crisp clarity that made every surface seem sharper, every reflection more defined. And inside Westbridge Luxury Motors, the showroom was already alive with quiet ambition. Sunlight streamed through the towering glass panels, casting long streaks of gold across the marble floors while the vehicles stood in perfect alignment, like silent declarations of status and success. Blake Thompson moved through the space with practiced precision, tablet in hand, his tailored suit immaculate, his confidence fully restored after the previous day. To him it had been nothing more than a minor interruption, a forgettable moment in an otherwise productive schedule. "We have 3 serious appointments before noon," he said to one of the junior salesmen, his voice calm but authoritative. "Make sure the presentation areas are spotless." The staff nodded quickly, adjusting displays, polishing already spotless surfaces, reinforcing the illusion that perfection was something that could be maintained indefinitely. A soft murmur of conversation filled the air as early clients began to arrive, well-dressed, assured, exactly the kind of clientele Blake recognized instantly. And as he greeted them with his signature smile, offering firm handshakes and confident assurances, There was no trace of hesitation left in him, no lingering doubt, just the steady rhythm of control he had built his reputation on. Yet beneath that rhythm, something subtle shifted, almost imperceptible, like a pause between notes that no one consciously noticed, but everyone somehow felt. Outside, beyond the glass, the street remained calm, traffic light, the occasional car passing by without consequence, until a low, unfamiliar sound began to emerge, not loud, not aggressive, but distinct, the kind of sound that carried weight without effort, a deep, smooth engine tone that did not rush, did not compete, simply arrived. One of the sales associates near the entrance glanced up first, his attention drawn instinctively toward the source. Then another followed, their conversations trailing off mid-sentence as the sound grew closer. Blake continued speaking to a client, explaining the features of a limited edition model, his voice steady, but even he felt it now. That subtle shift in the atmosphere, the kind that does not ask for attention but takes it anyway. And then the vehicle appeared, gliding into view beyond the glass doors, a Rolls-Royce Phantom, its polished exterior reflecting the morning light like liquid metal, every line of its design carrying quiet authority. The car did not speed, did not hesitate. It simply moved with a certainty that made everything else seem momentary by comparison. Conversations inside the showroom slowed, then stopped entirely, as heads turned in unison, eyes drawn toward the entrance. The car came to a smooth, precise stop directly in front of the building, the engine settling into silence, so complete it seemed to deepen the quiet inside. Blake's words faded mid-sentence, his client no longer listening. No one was, because something about the moment refused to be ignored, the kind of arrival that did not need announcement, did not need explanation. It simply changed the room. The automatic doors remained closed for a fraction longer than usual, as if even the building itself hesitated, and in that suspended second, the entire showroom held its breath, unaware that what stood just beyond the glass was not just a car, but the consequence of everything that had been said, everything that had been assumed, and everything that could no longer be undone. And as the handle of the rear door shifted ever so slightly, a quiet realization began to settle into the room, not yet understood, but already unavoidable, the kind that does not ask for permission before it changes everything. The rear door opened with a smooth, deliberate motion, not rushed, not dramatic, just precise, as if even the car understood the weight of the moment it was about to deliver. And from within that quiet, polished interior, a familiar pair of worn sneakers touched the pavement first, followed by the simple white blouse that no one in the showroom had thought twice about the day before. Emily Carter stepped out with the same calm composure she had carried yesterday, her expression steady, her posture relaxed, but now framed by something that no one inside could ignore. The sunlight caught the edge of the vehicle behind her, reflecting off its flawless surface, turning her silhouette into something entirely different from what they remembered. Inside, the room froze. Conversation stopped mid-word. A salesman who had been reaching for a brochure paused with his hand suspended in the air. Blake Thompson felt the shift before he fully understood it. His gaze locked onto the figure, stepping through the glass doors as they slid open once more. And for the first time since he had taken control of that showroom floor, his confidence hesitated, just slightly. Emily walked forward at the same unhurried pace, her footsteps echoing softly against the marble, the same sound as yesterday. But now every step carried a presence that filled the entire space. She did not look around for approval, did not acknowledge the stares that followed her. She simply moved as if she had always belonged there, as if the room had just needed time to catch up. The driver remained by the car outside, standing still, composed, his presence understated yet unmistakably professional, a detail that did not go unnoticed by anyone watching. Blake straightened instinctively, adjusting his jacket, his mind working quickly to reframe what he was seeing, to fit it into something that made sense. But the pieces did not align, not with the memory of yesterday, not with the assumptions he had been so certain of. Emily stopped just a few feet in front of him, close enough that the silence between them became its own kind of pressure. Her eyes met his, steady, clear, not accusing, not angry, just present. And that absence of emotion unsettled him more than any confrontation could have. "Good morning," she said softly. The same tone she had used before, unchanged, as if nothing about her had shifted, even though everything around her clearly had. Blake opened his mouth, then paused. The words he would normally rely on suddenly out of reach, the practiced lines, the controlled responses, none of them seemed to fit the moment unfolding in front of him. Behind him, the clients he had been assisting stood silent, their attention no longer on the cars, but entirely on this exchange. On this reversal that no one had expected but everyone now understood, Emily glanced briefly around the showroom, her gaze moving across the polished vehicles, the carefully arranged displays, the people who had watched her leave the day before without question, and then back to Blake. "I believe I was told I should come back when I was ready," she continued, her voice calm, almost gentle, but carrying a clarity that cut through the room without effort. The words landed softly, yet their meaning echoed far louder than anything he had said before. Blake felt the weight of every assumption settle. At once, the memory of his own voice replaying in sharp contrast to the reality standing in front of him now. And for the first time, the space he had controlled so completely felt unfamiliar, unstable, as if it no longer belonged to him in the same way. No one moved, no one spoke, because some moments do not need explanation. They simply reveal what was always there, waiting, and as Emily stood there, composed and unshaken, the showroom that had once dismissed her now held its breath, facing a truth it could not quietly ignore. Blake felt the silence press in around him, thick and undeniable, the kind that stripped away rehearsed confidence and left only what was real. His fingers tightened slightly against the edge of his tablet before he lowered it completely, his usual composure now replaced by something far less certain. "Ms. Carter, was it?" he said, the name slower this time, as if saying it correctly might somehow restore balance to a situation that had already shifted beyond his control. Emily gave a small nod, her expression unchanged, her calm presence steady against the tension building in the room. Blake cleared his throat softly, straightening his posture as he attempted to regain the authority that had come so easily just 24 hours earlier. "Of course, welcome back," he continued, his tone adjusting, softer now, more careful, every word measured as though stepping across fragile ground. "I believe there may have been a misunderstanding yesterday." The phrase hung in the air, familiar, almost automatic, but it landed differently now, because everyone in the room knew exactly what it meant, and more importantly, what it did not fix. Emily's eyes held his for a moment longer, not challenging, not dismissive, just present, and in that stillness, it became clear that she did not need him to explain anything. She had already understood, long before he was ready to admit it. "I would like to see that model," she said simply, her voice quiet but unmistakably direct, and as she turned her gaze toward the midnight black coupe displayed under the spotlight, the same car he had pointed to the day before, the entire room seemed to shift with her, attention following her movement like a tide. Blake hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, before stepping aside slightly, the gesture subtle but significant, no longer directing her, no longer guiding the interaction, but making space. "Absolutely," he replied quickly, his voice carrying a note of urgency now, as if eager to correct something that could no longer be undone. "Right this way." He gestured toward the vehicle, his hand open, respectful, the same motion as before, but stripped of its earlier condescension. As they walked across the marble floor, the sound of their footsteps echoed softly, each step reinforcing the quiet transformation that had taken place. The other employees watched closely, their earlier amusement replaced with a careful stillness. No one spoke, no one interrupted, because something about the moment demanded attention without permission. When they reached the car, Blake moved to open the door, his movements precise, controlled, but there was a noticeable difference now, a hesitation that had not existed before, a recognition that this interaction was no longer on his terms. Emily paused beside the vehicle, her reflection faintly visible in its polished surface, and for a brief moment, she ran her fingers lightly along the edge of the door, not admiring, not impressed, just familiar, as if this was not a dream fulfilled, but something already known. Blake noticed it, that subtle detail, and it unsettled him more than anything else. because it suggested a reality he had completely failed to see. "Would you like to sit inside?" he asked, his voice quieter now, careful, almost deferential. Emily looked at him briefly, then back at the car, and nodded once. A simple, understated motion that carried more weight than any demand could have, as Blake opened the door fully, stepping back to give her space. The room behind them remained completely silent, watching, absorbing, understanding, because in that moment, it was no longer about a car, or a sale, or even a single interaction. It was about the quiet unraveling of every assumption that had been made the day before. And as Emily prepared to step forward, the balance of the room had already shifted permanently, in a way that no apology could reverse, only reveal. Emily lowered herself into the driver's seat with quiet ease, her movements natural, unhurried, as if the car had been waiting for her rather than the other way around. The soft leather adjusted beneath her without a sound, and as her hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, there was no trace of hesitation, no wide-eyed admiration, just familiarity, the kind that does not need to announce itself. Blake stood just outside the open door, watching, his posture carefully composed, but his thoughts no longer aligned with the confident rhythm he had relied on for years, because everything about this moment contradicted what he believed he understood about people, about appearances, about who belonged and who did not. This model features a handcrafted interior. He began, his voice steady but noticeably quieter than before, each word chosen with care, as if he were speaking into a space that no longer belonged entirely to him. Emily listened, her gaze moving briefly across the dashboard, the polished details, the precision of the design, and then back to him, not impressed, not dismissive, simply aware, and that awareness carried more weight than any reaction could have. "It is well designed," she said softly, her tone even, acknowledging without exaggeration. Blake nodded quickly, encouraged by the response, though uncertain of its meaning. "It is one of our most sought-after models," he added, the familiar phrase returning, but lacking its former certainty. Behind him, the staff remained still, their attention fixed on the exchange. The earlier hierarchy of the room now quietly rearranged. Emily placed her hand on the door frame and stepped out smoothly, her movements controlled, precise, and as she closed the door gently, the soft click echoed across the showroom like a final note settling into place. She turned slightly, her eyes meeting Blake's once more, and for a moment, the room seemed to narrow around them, everything else fading into the background. "I will take it," she said, her voice calm, clear, and without hesitation. The words landed simply, without emphasis, without performance, but their impact moved through the room like a ripple. Blake blinked, just once, the statement processing slower than it should have, not because it was unclear, but because it challenged everything that had come before it. "Of course," he replied quickly, almost instinctively, though his voice carried a slight break in its rhythm. "We can begin the paperwork immediately." He gestured toward his office, eager to move forward, to restore some sense of normalcy. But Emily did not move. Instead, she reached into her bag once more, her movements deliberate, and pulled out a small, unmarked envelope, holding it between her fingers for a brief moment before extending it toward him. Blake hesitated, then accepted it, his expression tightening slightly as he opened it. Inside was a single card, simple, understated, yet unmistakable. His eyes scanned the name printed across it, then the title beneath, and in that instant, the remaining structure of his assumptions collapsed completely. His posture shifted, almost imperceptibly, but enough for those watching to notice. Because recognition has a way of changing a person before they can control it. Emily watched him quietly, her expression unchanged, giving him the space to understand what she had never needed to explain. The room held its breath once again, but this time, it was not anticipation, it was realization, the kind that settles slowly but completely, leaving no room for denial. And as Blake lowered the card, his voice failed him for just a second, the confidence he had worn so easily replaced by something far more honest. Because in that moment, he was no longer the one defining the interaction, he was the one trying to catch up to it. And the silence that followed did not feel empty, it felt earned. Blake's fingers tightened slightly around the card, the clean white surface now feeling heavier than it should have. His eyes scanning the name again as if repetition might somehow change what it meant, but it did not. The title beneath it remained exactly the same, clear, undeniable, and quietly devastating to everything he had assumed just one day earlier. Emily Carter, founder and managing director. The words settled into the room even before he spoke them aloud. Because recognition does not need to be announced to be understood. It shows in posture, in silence, in the way a person's certainty begins to unravel without warning. Blake lifted his gaze slowly, meeting hers again. But this time there was no trace of superiority left, only a careful awareness, the kind that comes too late to change what has already been done. I was not aware, he began, his voice lower now, measured, but lacking the smooth confidence it once carried. Emily said nothing, her expression calm, unchanged, giving him no resistance, no interruption, and somehow that made the moment heavier, because there was nothing for him to push against, no argument to deflect, only the quiet presence of truth standing directly in front of him, behind them. The staff remained completely still, the earlier energy of the showroom replaced by a collective stillness, each person aware that they were witnessing something far beyond a simple transaction. Blake straightened slightly, attempting to recover some sense of professionalism. If there is anything we can do to make up for yesterday, he continued, choosing his words carefully now, we would be more than willing to ensure you receive the highest level of service. The offer was sincere, but it arrived after the moment where it might have mattered. Emily glanced briefly around the showroom. Once more, her eyes moving across the same space that had quietly rejected her before, the polished floors, the carefully arranged vehicles, the people who now avoided her gaze. And then she looked back at Blake, her expression steady, thoughtful, as if weighing something beyond the immediate situation. Service was never the issue, she said softly, her voice carrying clearly through the silence without needing to rise. The words landed gently, but their meaning cut through the room with unmistakable precision. Blake felt them immediately, not as accusation, but as realization, because what she said did not require explanation. It revealed something far more fundamental than a mistake in protocol or process. It exposed the difference between perception and reality, between assumption and truth. Emily paused for a brief moment, allowing the silence to settle once more, then added, "It is how you decide who deserves it." Her tone remained calm, almost reflective, but the impact of her words shifted something deeper within the room. A few of the employees lowered their eyes. Others stood motionless, absorbing what had just been said. Blake exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment now fully present. Not dramatic, not explosive, but undeniable. He nodded once, a small, quiet acknowledgement that carried more honesty than any apology he could have offered. "Understood," he said, his voice steady again, though changed, stripped of its earlier certainty, because now it was grounded in something real, something he could not ignore. Emily held his gaze for one final moment, then gave a slight nod, not as acceptance, not as forgiveness, but as recognition, and as she turned her attention back toward the car, the room remained silent, not out of tension anymore, but out of understanding, because some lessons do not need to be spoken loudly to be remembered. They simply settle into place, reshaping everything that comes after. The paperwork was completed with a quiet efficiency that no longer carried the same polished confidence as before, each signature placed carefully, each document handled with a level of attention that had not been offered the day before. Blake moved through the process with measured precision, his voice steady, respectful, no longer performing, simply doing what should have been done from the beginning. Emily remained composed throughout, reviewing each page with calm focus, her presence grounding the room in a way that no display of luxury ever could. When the final document was signed, Blake set the pen down gently, his movements slower now, more deliberate, as if aware that the moment carried weight beyond the transaction itself. "Everything is ready," he said, his tone even, no longer trying to impress, only to acknowledge. Emily nodded once, her expression unchanged, and reached for the keys placed neatly on the desk, the small metallic object catching the light as she lifted it, simple, understated, yet representing something far greater than its size suggested. She turned toward the exit without hesitation, her steps steady against the marble floor, and this time, every eye in the showroom followed her not with curiosity or judgment, but with recognition. The glass doors opened once more, allowing the morning light to spill inside as she walked out. The Rolls-Royce waiting exactly where it had arrived, silent, composed, the driver stepping forward just enough to acknowledge her presence before stepping back again, allowing her space. Emily paused briefly beside the car, her hand resting lightly on the door, and for a moment, she looked back, not searching, not lingering, just observing. Her gaze passing across the room that had once dismissed her so easily. Now completely still, completely aware, Blake stood near the center of the showroom, his posture no longer rigid, his expression no longer guarded, simply watching, understanding settling into place without resistance. Emily gave a small nod, not directed at anyone in particular, but carrying a quiet finality. And then she opened the door and stepped inside. The movement smooth, unhurried, the door closing with a soft, precise sound that echoed gently through the space. The engine started with that same low, controlled hum, and as the car pulled away, it did not rush, it did not demand attention. It simply moved forward, leaving behind a silence that felt different now, not empty, but full, the kind of silence that lingers after something has been understood. Inside the showroom, no one spoke for several long seconds. The polished surfaces, the perfect arrangement of vehicles, the carefully maintained image of exclusivity all remained exactly the same. And yet, something fundamental had shifted, something that could not be reset or overlooked. Blake exhaled slowly, his gaze lowering briefly before lifting again, not to reclaim control, but to see more clearly, because in that moment, the lesson did not arrive with force, it settled quietly, firmly, impossible to ignore. And as the sunlight continued to move across the marble floor, the room held that silence just a little longer, as if recognizing that respect, once overlooked, had finally found its way back. A simple woman walks into a luxury showroom and is quietly judged by a powerful dealer who believes appearance defines worth. What follows is one of those touching stories where dignity is tested in silence and revealed in the most unexpected way. As the quiet woman leaves without protest, the room forgets her presence, unaware that her return will shift everything they thought they understood. The next day, a moment unfolds that turns assumptions into realization. As a single arrival transforms the atmosphere and exposes the truth behind status and perception. This is one of those touching stories that reminds us how quickly people decide who deserves respect and how rarely they question that decision. The powerful dealer, once confident and in control, is forced to confront the quiet strength of someone he misjudged as silence becomes louder than any argument. Through subtle actions and calm composure, the quiet woman reveals that true power does not announce itself. It simply exists, waiting for the right moment. This narrative stands among the most compelling, touching stories where humility meets consequence and where respect is not demanded but naturally restored. As the interaction unfolds, every glance, every pause, and every word carries meaning, showing how easily perception can be wrong and how deeply it can impact others. The turning point arrives not with confrontation but with clarity, leaving the entire room in stillness as realization replaces assumption. This is why touching stories like this resonate so deeply, because they reflect a universal truth about judgment and character. The powerful dealer learns that professionalism is not just about service, but about who receives it without question. The quiet woman, unchanged from the beginning, walks away with the same calm dignity she carried throughout, leaving behind a lesson that no one in that room will forget. Among touching stories, this one stands out for its quiet intensity and emotional payoff, proving that respect is never about appearance, but about how we choose to see others. In the end, it is not the luxury, the setting, or the transaction that defines the moment, but the silent understanding that follows, reminding us that the people we overlook may be the ones who change everything, and that is what makes stories like this truly unforgettable. Touching stories